Yeah, that sounds about right. Awesome, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you. I know you're very busy, as evident on your LinkedIn and social media. I feel like you're always moving and always working on a million projects. So, um, I'll try to be really respectful of your time here. But I appreciate carving out time in your schedule.
Oh,
Um,
thanks for asking me to speak because one, I always, we've followed each other online for a long time, so it's great to talk to you. Two, I'm just a really big believer in kind of demystifying what we do. And three, I don't really do any marketing for my practice, so this is how I get the word out. So it's mutually beneficial.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit actually, because you've been um, I would say like a prominent figure in the industrial design community for a long time now. I remember like the first. So I'll gush a little bit. I'll say that I'm hugely honored that you're taking the time and having this call. I've been a massive fan of your work for a long time now.
Thank you.
When I was in college, I think you came and you spoke at the Southeastern IDSA conference. This is
Mm.
way back in like 2012 or 13.
I remember
And I
that.
remember
Yeah.
that talk, it had a huge impact on me and my career and kind of the way I thought about design and the way I thought about how a design career could grow and evolve. I think at that time you were at Sound United, so you had gone
Mhm.
through a few different milestones, let's say, throughout your journey. Um, I'm just curious, is that something that has been intentional for a long time, or is it something that you're just naturally passionate about? Because I know you're very involved with Core 77 as well. I'm just curious if you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think a bit of both in terms of is it something that naturally happened and also something I fostered. Um, I think I've always viewed design as a bit of a fellowship. Like I feel like when I went to design school, I finally kind of met my people. And so learning about design and designers, talking to them, understanding how they got to where they got to has always been something that's really been um, just fascinated me. And so I think that curiosity has kind of built community wherever I've gone, wherever I've lived all over the country, worked in all different kinds of jobs. Um, but wherever I go, I seem to just kind of plug into, or quite honestly, sometimes just create design community. Um, and I don't think it's 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 just something that I'm interested in. I remember once I was on Twitter in the old days when it was Twitter a long time ago, and somebody said, "Oh, you really created quite the like designer persona for yourself." And I was so confused. I was just like, I don't understand. I don't even understand what that means. Like, what is a persona
Right.
of being a designer? I'm just kind of go through the world being myself and trying to be generous in my time and being curious about what I'm curious in. And sometimes, and I feel like that gives back, multifold. And I mean, I remember um, when I first came here, back when I first moved back to Portland in 2019 before the pandemic. The IDSA was like, hey, there's no real, IDSA chapter in Portland's kind of gone away. Could you do something? And so I was like, well, I can put together a happy hour and I'll just, text some friends and 50 people came. And they're like, we've
Oh,
never had
wow.
an event this big, like ever. And I was like, it's not really an event. It's just friends getting together. Like it's not, we don't have to make it a thing. And I still do that like every once in a while, on a Saturday, I'll text, some designers like, hey, let's grab coffee. And, sometimes 30, 40 people come. And I love that. I love that, like, helping to kind of build that community because I really feel like we're all such kindred spirits. And, if I can be of help to somebody, I want to be of help. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting. So the Portland kind of getting coffee, this is recently, right? As you've sort of built your new studio and moved back to the area.
Yeah, we moved back here in 2019, just 6 months before the pandemic hit. Um, and then so, really, and my vision coming back, we still have so many friends here, was to kind of create this neutral space, right? So there's a lot of industrial designers in Portland, but they work for big corporations like Nike and Adidas and Under
Right.
Armour, and it's really hard for those people to kind of get together sometimes. And so, I just wanted to be a little bit of a neutral party and be able to kind of create some things where people could come together and hang out and kind of leave work behind and just be creative people chatting.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of having that space where you can um, talk with other designers who are outside your organization because I feel like sometimes those work outings they can so quickly just become about the job. Whereas this kind of sounds like it becomes a little bit more about the community and the process and like the love of design, which is amazing. So I'm curious, like, what advice would you give to if there's someone out there who's living in like let's say Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or one of these kind of smaller cities? What advice would you give to someone who's like trying to build community? Is it that to kind of keep it informal and keep it low key?
I think so. First of all, what works for me, might not work for someone else. Everybody's different. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm kind of a pretty casual person, and again, I like just spending time with people. Um, I love asking people for advice. I love giving advice when I can, and I love connecting people. So, for me, I think my advice, since you asked, would be just reach out to people. There are so many people who you could spend time with if you just ask to buy him a coffee. And I feel like that has benefited me so many times in my life. And does it work every time? Out of like, even if, for me, out of every 5, 10 people I ask to get coffee, maybe only two will say yes, or make it a priority. And of those two, like, not everybody's gonna click, and that's okay too. But it's a little bit of a numbers game, and you just put yourself out there, and then let it be natural. I feel like I've also been really fortunate to have some amazing mentors in my career. And I don't think I ever asked any of them, like, would you be my mentor? I asked them to have coffee or lunch. And at the end of that coffee or lunch, they said, let's do this again sometime. And I was like, great, when? And, getting on their calendar, and, you do that 10, 15 times with someone and they become your mentor. Um, versus, I've had people reach out to me on Instagram, like cold, like in the DMs, like, would you be my mentor? I'm like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't know you. Like, we're
Right.
far apart. Like, I, that's not something you can just kind of like put on someone. Um, you have to it's a relationship that has to develop. Um, and just before I ramble too on long, I want to say, like, um, all of these interactions, they are relationships. So if you're going into it asking someone for something, you're probably going to say no, right? But if you go into it giving of yourself, even if the giving of yourself is like, can I buy you coffee? Um, it will go better. And I once read, like, relationships are a little bit like bank accounts. To take something out, you have to put something in. And I feel like that's just something I really want to impart on the next generation, because it's easier than ever to reach people. Like, when I was coming up in the late 90s, like, I couldn't just like message Mark Newson or Kareem Rashid, right? But anybody can like message me instantly on Instagram or Threads or LinkedIn or wherever, right? So now that you have that power, and that ability, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to come off? I have people again just like DMing me, like, I want to set up a Zoom call with you. I'm like, I don't know you, and like, I'm busy, right? Like, so that immediately puts someone in a negative light. But if somebody approaches me and was like, I have this issue and I'd love your advice. Here's my issue in 2 sentences. Do you have any thoughts? I might be like, hey, yeah, let's hop on a call or something. Um, So anyway, I don't know if any of that made any sense, but just keep in mind that designs of fellowship, it's all about relationships, and really your reputation is everything. So if you come at someone kind of aggressively, your reputation, that will create a reputation. But if you come at somebody in a more generous way, that will again look well for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that struggle for mentorship is definitely something that like I've had a hard time with in the past for sure. And I'm sure like a lot of young designers or people who are kind of getting that footing in their career, everyone kind of has to like cross that hurdle. And I feel like to echo your comments, it is just being nice and just being kind-hearted and reaching out to someone, just spelling your sentences, having complete sentences and spelling your words right, and just being honest and authentic with what you're doing and not trying. I really like your metaphor of the bank account. I think that that rings really true. Um,
I don't want it to seem transactional. But the point is like you have to deposit.
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
part I want.
yeah,
Yeah, I want to
yeah,
emphasize. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and I think too, like I've as I've kind of started to reach out more, I've always been shocked with how willing people are to reply and donate their time. So yeah, I think sometimes we build up these walls in our heads, and we come from a place of insecurity, and it becomes yeah very very rigid very quickly. But yeah, I love the idea of keeping it loose. Yeah, I was also curious to ask you about. You've been very involved with Core 77 for a
Mhm.
long time, and I think you're a moderator on the forums as well, correct?
Yeah,
I,
I'm not on there much anymore, but for a really long time, I was really involved. I would write for the blog. I would produce events from time to time. I was an admin for the forums for a number of years. And this, again, just all out of a sense of kind of like building community.
yeah, definitely. I feel like when I was younger, Core 77 was such a valuable resource, and there was all
Mhm.
this great information on there. I'm curious to ask you, what do you think is the future of sort of like online fellowship specifically, like where do you think those things are going as we kind of start to see forums, for better or for worse, maybe fading by the wayside, or there's kind of the downfall of like, individual websites and the rise of social media. I'm just curious, like as someone who thinks a lot about the future, how do you see those things evolving going forward?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. There's some positives and negatives to every forum. One of the positives of a forum is like all the knowledge kind of stays there and it's very easily searchable, and you have these really long conversations, sometimes that span decades at this point. Um, but the negative is it's kind of a walled garden, and so you get like a few really loud voices. Um, the positive of social media is it's very democratic and it's very open. The negative is things just kind of like slide by, right? And then it's like pretty much impossible to find that conversation again. Um, I personally have really been getting into threads. I have like I think closing in on 6,000 followers on threads, and like I'm finding like
Oh
a ton
wow.
of like really great conversations on there. Um, LinkedIn, I think can be really great too. Like it's very professional, right? Like you are who you are, which is nice. Nobody's kind of hiding. But it gets a little salesy on there sometimes, and
Yeah,
I would caution young designers to, don't be afraid to be a little bit more laid back on LinkedIn. Have you seen there's this like uh this funny thing of like Darth Vader on LinkedIn, and it's like all these like Lord Sith Lord, all these like accolades, and
right.
then like
The
it's like Darth
positive
Vader,
spin.
in real life, assistant to the manager of the Death Star. Um, and so I think it gets a little bit like that, where people tend to really be like overstate, it's like and these very kind of almost like templated, like I'm so humbled and honored to announce that I got to clean out the spray booth in the shop from where it's like it's so like
Right.
okay, like let's just tone it down. But to your question of where's kind of online community going, I think it's just really fluid right now. It's very fragmented between Instagram, um, LinkedIn, now Threads. even a little bit on TikTok, and who knows what it will be like in 5 years. And maybe that's a good thing. I go back and read some of those comments from like 10 years ago on Core 77 forums, and like some of them are embarrassing. So because things change. And so maybe it's good to be fluid, and temporal. So yeah, and I think the other thing is like it's all excuse me, still getting over this cold. It's all about like how do you transition those relationships to real life. And so I think that's something that was paid off like amazingly for me on Course 77, not through any like intention, but there were so many times where people would be traveling to Portland or whatever city I was living in at the time, and they'd reach out. Um, I had hired 4 or 5 designers off of there because I had seen their work develop since they were students.
Wow.
Um, there was a period of time at Nike when my for those of you that don't know, my avatar name on Course 77 is Yo. It's a long story. And there'd be times when I mean almost like once a month I would say someone from recruiting would give me a call and be like, we have somebody here like who's interviewing and they say they want to have lunch with Yo. And so um I think how do you turn those digital relationships into real lasting relationships, and I think that's the key for me at least.
Yeah, that's yeah, I mean again, that's great advice. I think too, like I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like COVID brought a lot of those barriers or stigmas down.
Yeah,
Because I've been doing the same thing. I've been start as restrictions have come down and I've been starting to travel again. I found that all these people that I was able to meet online during COVID, it's
yeah.
like, hey, I'm coming into Chicago in, 2 weeks for NeoCon, would you be interested in grabbing a coffee or grabbing a drink? And I've been able to like now start to piece together all these connections. So I feel like I don't know what it was, if it's all, I don't know if that's been consistent or if that's a post-COVID thing, but I feel like that is like a positive forward outlook that I'm definitely experiencing as well.
And I'm guilty of getting it wrong too, Ray. I remember when it was, because a year or so ago I was up in Seattle and I got together with a friend who worked at Teague at the time. And I had met John Barrett, who's the head of Teague, a few times. And John heard about it and was like, Michael, why didn't you reach out to me to get coffee? I'm like, well, I didn't want to bother you. You're like, he's like, you would never bother me. Like, what are you talking about? Like you were in Seattle. I would have loved to see you. I was like, I don't know. I just, got in my own head, right? And so it's important to remember. Um, and NeoCon is a great example. I went to NeoCon for the first time last June, and I mean, I just saw so many friends. Um, and I plan to go. I plan to go this June. So if you go, Ray, let me know. But yeah, I think it's that's why we're there. We're all there to have that sense of community. So um, yeah, those are the times to reach out.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, So I'll admit I have these huge lists of questions for you, and
Yeah,
your career is very well documented. So I have kind of like more specific questions about different stages or advice that you might
perfect.
have. So but for anyone who doesn't know, you had a very long tenure at Nike. What was it, 10 years or so?
It was about 8.
8 years. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm curious to ask specifically, kind of drill in deeper about your jump from footwear into industrial design. It's a transition that I've gone through as well. And what I think is interesting is since I've done that jump, I've had multiple people reach out to me asking about the transition or advice or
Mhm.
how they can kind of adjust their portfolios or this or that. So I'm curious to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who is uh, has a background in footwear design and is jumping to industrial design. And I'm curious as well, like what value do you think a footwear designer could bring to like the broader product industry that like another industrial designer like might not, like a skill they might not have?
Yeah, hang on one second. I need to mute so I can cough.
Yeah, yeah, you're fine. No worries. I'm getting over a cold as well, so I've been also going on mute and chugging water.
Yeah. Um, so I'm going to start with the second part of your question of what value can a footwear designer
Yeah,
bring to another specialty or a broader industrial design role. And that's that we learn a lot of like really specific things in footwear that are insanely applicable to anything that nobody else really learns. We learn a ton about how like the pipeline from production to retail works and how merchandising works and assortments and production timelines. I feel like we're much more involved with the whole process in footwear. And then you learn almost every manufacturing technique, right? You're going to learn everything from like family injection molding all the way up to like how a lady sews something by hand, and everything in between. You learn a ton about different materials, and how they come, and then how all those different materials need to come together. And then you have to create something that functions well, performance-wise, and responds somehow to what's going on in fashion and trends. So you have all these uh, goals that are in competition with each other. And so you learn very quickly how to prioritize what on each project. And those skills are insanely valuable. And I find that you don't get that as readily in other areas, like sometimes like consumer electronics. But and then I think the other thing that you really learn in footwear is the power of brand and branding. And you learn how to like create a design language. At Nike, I worked on the Nike brand and then in Jordan, and then lastly in Converse after they purchased Converse. All three of those brands make shoes, right? But for very different people. Um, and so, understanding how different brands play where and how. And then that's something I took directly to Sound United that had five audio brands, right? It's like, oh, they're all make audio, but for who, when, where, how. Um, so that's where I think the value is. And then how I specifically did it, Ray, I feel like my whole professional life has been a story of somebody telling me I couldn't do something and then me proving that person wrong within pretty much 30 days. Like I feel like when I was in school, I had multiple professors say I would never make it as an industrial designer. And by the time I graduated, I was doing independent studies with Nike and Nissan and graduated with the faculty award from the same professors. But anyway, and then when I left school, I actually worked for a small design consultancy in Connecticut called Evo for 4.5 years. And there we were doing, toys for Hasbro. We were doing um, glassware for Libby Glass, medical robotics, and Nike turned into a really big client as well. We were working with the Nike Innovation Kitchen. And so after 4.5 years there, um, I actually had worked on quite a few products that went to production. I won't say I brought them to production because as a consultant, sometimes you don't get to interact in that way. Um, but I noticed there was this trend or just this reality where a lot of projects didn't make it to production, even though the clients were happy. It would get canceled down the line, or maybe it would get radically changed, and we weren't a part of that conversation. And I wanted to learn what was happening that in the process that I wasn't involved in. So I decided I wanted to go corporate. um and out of all the things I had worked on, I had really just enjoyed footwear. I grew up in the 80s when Michael Jordan is, in the 90s, and Michael Jordan's like peak. It's like I got my first job to get a pair of Nike Huaraches. So, working on it was at McDonald's, by the way, in case you're wondering. It wasn't very glamorous. Um, but so I was like, if I'm just gonna do one thing, I would love to do footwear. And if I'm gonna do footwear, I want to do it at Nike. And so many people are like, you can't just like leave consulting and go to Nike. Like you'll never get a job at Nike. You have to start at New Balance or some other smaller brand. And I was just like, yeah, I don't think so. Um, I prepared this really big portfolio to bring to Nike. I had a poster of just like 120 footwear ideas and just roll it out on the conference table.
Wow.
Um, but I interviewed at New Balance, Converse, Reebok, Adidas, um, Diesel, which at the time was like big. This was in like 2003. They were owned by there was a licensing group in Santa Barbara that was doing Diesel footwear. Um, and Nike was my last interview, and I pretty much had offers from all of them. I remember I had an offer from New Balance that like expired in a week. So when I interviewed at Nike, by the time my Nike interview happened, I was like, "Look, I have an offer from New Balance, so you need to make me an offer in 48 hours." And they're like, "No problem."
Oh,
So,
wow.
um, and I had three different teams at Nike make me an offer. Um, and I'm not saying this to boast. I'm saying this to like, if I had listened to those people, I would never have gotten, it was just, you can't always listen to people. It's good to get their advice, but you have to trust yourself too. Um, and so, I just was just like, I want to go work for that brand. That brand connects with me as a person. I want to go where I can learn. And I felt like I could learn the most there. And it wasn't, by the way, it wasn't the best offer. There was another company that had offered me more, substantially more. And when I told them that I was taking a job from Nike, they asked me what Nike was paying me, and they said they would double it. And I told them no,
Oh, wow.
because again,
Wow.
it wasn't, what Nike had offered me was enough to live very comfortably. It wasn't double, but I was like, I want to go where I can learn, and again, to bring it back to community, where it could be a part of a community. And there's, at the time there was like 300 designers there, so now it's like 1,000. So you're really a part of your own design community. Um, and honestly, I was very happy there. I probably could have been, I could have probably retired from there and been happy. But I think I always just had this itch to do other things. I just love, as you see the wall behind me, I love design. I love thinking about different things. Um, I was freelancing a little bit while I was there, and open about it. I would talk to my mentor, who is the head of design. And I was like, like, John, is this okay if I do this? And he's like, well, technically no, but like I know if I tell you no, you're just gonna do it anyway. So just keep telling me. And like obviously nothing competitive. It's like, I was freelancing for Icon, which is like they make super high-end vehicles. Like it couldn't
Oh, yeah.
be less competitive. And I was learning things on those projects I was bringing back to Nike. And in fact, the very first Icon CJ3B that I designed, Nike had it shipped to campus to have it on display at campus, which was pretty cool. That was a
Wow.
cool day.
That's cool.
Yeah. Um, and the same at Nike. When I was at Nike for 2 years, John asked me, he's like, what do you want to do next year, Michael? And I was like, I want to go work for Jordan. He's like, there's only been 12 designers ever to work in Jordan. You've been here like 18 months. Why would we let you do it? And I was like, this is why I want to do it. Um, what I want to learn. Dwayne Edwards was the design director for Jordan at the time. I was like, I want to learn from him. Um, it wasn't about ego. It was about like, what's the group where I feel like I could learn from and be under the most pressure in a way. I always sought that. And then the same when they purchased Converse, again, what's the most different I could do from Jordan, right? Um, and then, after 7.5 years, I was just like started to get interested in some other things. And I applied for a job, kind of like not super seriously, but uh, just out of curiosity to be creative director at Frog Design. Because again, like I'm gonna leave if I'm going to go to a footwear company, I want to go to Nike. If I want to go to a design agency, back to consulting, I wanted to go to Frock Design. And they rejected me with a pretty harsh rejection letter. I was like, okay, fine. Um, and then a few months later, a recruiter called me and he's like, hey, I'm recruiting for this open position at Frog Design. I didn't tell him I had been rejected already, but I was just like, okay. And I sent him my portfolio. And of course, my portfolio had Nike stuff, but I had also worked on a bunch of, you have to work for it, right? So I had worked on a bunch of conceptual mobile phone projects and things like that, and then sent them to magazines and blogs. And so even though I didn't have production work, I could show like, hey, Gizmodo actually published this phone concept I did.
Right. Yeah.
And I went to the interview at Frog, and I actually didn't have a presentation. I just had some printouts of concepts and then a bunch of production work. And another creative director came in and he was like, "Ah, shoe guy," and I was like, "Nope,
Right.
not a shoe guy. A design director at probably one of the top five most recognizable brands on the planet, creating industry-leading product. And if that's something that Frog's not interested in, let me know. I'll pack up all my shit and interview's over." And he was
Right.
like, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry." And he's like, "Sat
Yeah.
there. He's like, please, let's start again. I'm so sorry." And again, I had an offer the next day. And
That's incredible.
I I called up my mentor at Nike and I asked him what I should do. I was just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I know, I know you've told the board of directors you want me to retire from Nike. Um, but I have this offer from Frog and I'm terrified to take it and I'm terrified not to take it. Because as much as I love it here, I'm not sure if I'm just ready to like plug in another 25 years.
Right.
And he's like, Michael, like, I'm going to remove the fear from the situation. Go take the job. And if you don't like it in 2 weeks, call me and get you something back here at Nike. He's like, it's fraud. Like, I get it. Like, go have an adventure. And he's like, you'll only ever be more valuable if you ever came back here. Um,
Wow.
so
That shows a lot of maturity on that employee's part to like recognize that, hey, like we recognize the value you're bringing, we recognize the value you're going to be gaining,
yeah,
and like that, like him valuing you as a person and as like a coworker, that shows huge
yeah.
maturity. Yeah.
As John Hoke, he just stepped down as chief
Mm,
design officer at Nike, and just one of the most brilliant creative people. I just always thinking like three, four steps ahead. But
yeah.
two, one of
Wow.
the most magnanimous people I've ever worked with. I don't know if I would have had the courage and the security to say what he said, you know. And that changed that sentence. And he told me, he's like, Michael, I could write you a check right now that would make you not leave. But he's like, in 5 years, you'll just hate me because you'll always wonder what would have happened. He's like, so go find out what will happen. And because I was at Frog for 2 years, and then one of our big clients, this company, Sound United, down in San Diego, asked me to come in-house. Um, and I built up their in-house design team from pretty much two or so to about 20 in 5 years. Um, and then I was turning 40. I turned 40 actually. A bunch of companies were trying to recruit me. So I was in talks with Tesla, HP, um, Amazon. I feel like there was a fourth company, I can't remember. And my wife and partner, Christina, was just like, all these companies want to work with you. Just like go out on your own, you know. They know who you are. And I think I had always, as a young person, idolized people like Raymond Loewy and Frank Lloyd Wright and people who had stood for something in design. Um, and of course, there are examples of people who do that in-house, whether it's Dieter Rams or um, Johnny Ive or Tinker Hatfield at Nike. But I always kind of looked up to those folks who were independent and working on all different things. Um, and again, I was terrified, but I really couldn't come up with an excuse not to do it. And I took it on as like a project. So I started interviewing people, and I interviewed about 12 people who either, were really high up at kind of small to medium sized brands or had founded them themselves, and just asked them for advice. it's like, hey, can I talk to you for an hour and get your advice? What would you tell your younger self when you're setting up your business, things like that? And I asked him at the end, like, do you think, knowing me, you know me, do you think I could do this? And 12 out of 12 said yes, and 6 out of 12 asked me to write a proposal for a project. And I was like, I don't have anything to,
Oh, wow.
so the first week of my independent practice signed 2 contracts.
That's
So
incredible.
I think the very short version of that answer, Ray, is like people my whole life have been trying to pigeonhole me. And that's just what people do. It makes, people like to put little intellectual handles on you to be like, oh, you're Ray, you do this. You're Michael, you do that. Um, you control that. You can ignore those handles. You can ignore that box they put you in and make your own. And I think controlling my own definition of myself has always been one of my most powerful assets.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Which is it, it's funny too because I feel like the value that we as design bring to an organization is being like inherently curious and inherently optimistic. And so it's
Mhm.
always interesting when we kind of put that viewpoint on each other of pigeonholing or viewing ourselves within specific roles because I feel like that's the our strongest asset is that curiosity and that looking forward and kind of the continuous learning. But
And we're rebellious, I think by
right,
nature as creative people. But there's kind of two kinds of rebels. There's the destructive rebel who just wants to like tear everything down. And those people are, cancerous to an organization. And then there's the creative rebel who wants to build things. Of like, there's so many places where I worked. Even when I was at Prague, I remember having a young designer working for me, and I was building a presentation for a client and giving him direction. And he was like, Michael, we don't do it that way. I'm like, correction, you didn't do it that way yesterday. This is how we're doing it today. And it's just like, I don't know, like I know this is gonna work. It's going to be fine.
right,
And
right.
so that like, and the same so many times, at Sound United, we're working with so many brilliant audio engineers. This is my favorite part of that job. Um, Matt Lyons, who was the VP of engineering, and Stu Lumsden, another VP of engineering under him. It's just brilliant guys, and just learning from them all these like just like I was learning at Nike about, creating product for NBA players or Olympians who had very specific needs, functional parameters, learning from these audio engineers, all the functional parameters, and then pushing on that and being like, okay, like what happens if you're telling me to make a soundbar for a TV, you want it to be 4 inches tall? What if I gave you the restriction of it can only be 2 inches tall, but not sound any worse? And then just like pushing, pulling, pushing, pulling. And so I love that. And I think certain people crack under that because it's very challenging to the business, it's challenging to engineering programs. But I think if you show people like, hey, I'm doing this because I want to help us um, get from this peak to the other peak without going into the valley.
Yeah, it's coming from an honest place of wanting to help and like that place of positivity. And in a way it's not it doesn't necessarily need to be confrontational or finger pointing. It's more about like how do we like this is great, but how do we take what we have and make it even better?
Yeah.
Um,
And even if it is confrontational, it's not personal.
right,
Right. So we can disagree even passionately, excuse me, even passionately. And I'd rather have someone I passionately disagree with than someone who doesn't care. Right. Because that's
right.
actually that friction is where the interesting solution happens of these kind of like two people kind of grinding. And then you're like, oh, wait, actually, there's this interesting thing. Um, but it's not personal, right? We can have a very strong disagreement about something for an hour, and at the end of it, grab a coffee or grab a beer, grab dinner, and be friends and actually respect each other. Because one thing I've learned, and took me a long time as a young designer to learn that my counterparts in engineering, my counterparts on the business side in marketing, they all also want to make a great product. They're just viewing the problem from a different angle, right? And um, if I can actually step out of my seat and get into their seat for a second, I can understand the problem in a different way.
Yeah, that's great. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I can't believe how much time has flown by already, and I want to be respectful of your schedule. So I'd love to make sure we carve out some time to talk a little bit about the work you're doing now and kind of all these different product categories you touch. I'm curious to ask, as someone who, as you mentioned now, you're inherently curious about like multiple categories and like a wide swath of different types of products and industry. As you've kind of been running your own studio and you've had this opportunity to work across really whatever projects you want, what have been like some of your favorite categories that you've worked with? And then as like a follow up, what categories haven't you worked on that have always been sort of like a dream or have like eluded you so far?
Great questions. I do, I think I love a project type more than a category. And that project type is something that's like really open and challenging, um, nebulous, hard to solve, hard to define. Um, and I love it when I work with clients that allow me to kind of be a part of the process quite a bit. So for the last, it'll be, gosh, it's going to be 5 years next month. One of my biggest clients has been Kire, which they make architectural wall and ceiling systems made from recycled PET, recycled water bottles. And they were purchased a little over a year ago by a bigger company named Carnegie that makes like very environmentally friendly textiles. So now I'm doing work with that bigger company as well. And I love working with them because I work on the industrial design. I am a big part of the product development process, working with the product team to bring it all the way to production. And then I also set the marketing launch teams. And then I work with their marketing team on all the marketing assets. So it's so fun to kind of like work. It's really almost as close to being in-house as you can be as an out-of-house person. Um, and then I'm working on some transportation work that I can't really talk about right now, but which is always also near and dear to my heart. And you could, in some ways, can't be more different. Like sustainable architectural elements that could be around for decades in a building. That's like, and it's amazing also to design things for other designers, designing products that will be used by architects and interior designers in
Yeah.
their work. So that's like a whole nother level of challenge and understanding that I love. And then working on these transportation projects. One transportation project that is public that came out recently is the Arc One, an electric speedboat. Um, that was a great project. I worked directly with the two founders of the company who came more from engineering backgrounds and more kind of commercial products. So, one was at SpaceX, the other had worked on B2B businesses. So really helping them to understand how you make a $300,000 boat, like pleasure craft sport boat, and the level of design refinement it's going to need to have. And
Yeah.
they
I
sold
was
out of
curious
two
just
year,
to,
they
yeah,
sold out
sorry
in
to
the first
interrupt
two
really
years of
quick.
production of that. So it was super exciting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to ask about the arc boat specifically because I feel like it's one thing to get like a shoe prototype in hand
sure.
or something that is um I don't know what the right word is, handheld or at like a certain
Yeah,
scale.
sure.
But what was it like stepping into a full form like working watercraft for the first time? I have to imagine that that's a little bit of a different experience.
That's insane. I mean, I test drove one of the prototypes down in Long Beach, and I was just like, I feel like I've had a lot of moments in my career where I have to step outside myself and just marvel at it later. Getting to
Yeah.
spend time with Michael Jordan, getting to know Hartmut Esslinger, who founded Frog, like all these like really I've had so many special moments where I'm like, if I think about this in the moment that it's happening, I'll blow it. I have to like kind of like put that over here so that I can
Right.
actually perform in the moment, if that makes sense. Um, but yeah, it was an amazing moment. And I was so happy that the product manager actually captured it on video because to just the first time I kind of opened the throttle up on a boat I designed was pretty amazing. And it was a really fun group to work with. Again, like I really got integrated with their engineering team and was on their engineering calls and on their Slack. Um, and helping them to realize like what this thing could be from just the overall vision and design language to color blocking, which again, another kind of a footwear way of thinking, but really made the boat
Right.
iconic. Um, to helping them to be know where to spend money, where not to, and what to source and what to do custom. And I remember they wanted to use an off-the-shelf throttle. And I was like, guys, like I know it's expensive to like custom make this throttle, but this is the like physical connection to the power source. And like you're like making your own battery packs. So I really think they should be custom. They didn't think so, but one of the engineering leads thought so. So we kind of like made our own little skunk works, and I like just quickly built the CAD myself for the throttle. He sourced it all out and had it prototyped, and they put the off the shelf one on the first prototype, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this isn't right." And he was like, "No, Michael already designed the throttle," and they just like right here, and they bolted it in.
Perfect.
So anyway, I love having those. I love having those relationships with clients when we can. Um,
Yeah, that's amazing. And talk about like the most emotional touch point on the boat. I would imagine it's going to be it's the steering wheel and it's the throttle is,
yeah,
as you're driving. I feel
yeah.
like people just kind of will keep their hand
Oh
rested
yeah,
there consistently as they're going around the lake or river or ocean or whatever it is.
totally.
So talk about like an important piece.
And it's this
Um,
like very heavy, like machined metal that and it's like really like clicks in and it feels good. So that was so I love working on such different things. For we just wrapped up working with them, but for like 3.5, 4 years, I was working with this company, Defender, that makes footwear for people with diabetes. Again, like couldn't be more different. And then the one category is pretty much probably, I mean, I've pretty much done everything from watches and tea kettles to boats and cars. Um, but the one category that has always kind of eluded me is commercial furniture. And
yeah.
so, I think that's an area I would like to explore more. And it will happen.
Yeah, I love the thing with furniture that I like, and a little bit maybe more so with home furnishings, but I think this applies to commercial design as well, is just the history of that
Mhm.
category, the fact that it goes back hundreds and hundreds of
Oh
years,
yeah.
and you can I think like when you talk to like I do a lot I'll go out a lot to thrift stores and antiques and
Yeah.
stores and things on the weekends. And when you talk to these antique dealers, they understand the value of great design and they understand designs that last and hold their value. And I feel like that is such an interesting application of furniture because so many other products um might have timeless design, but might have timed technology or relevance or whatever it is. But if you get a great side table or a great coffee table or one of those kind of like anchoring
Oh yeah.
pieces, it'll last forever. Um,
I mean, we
but
have
I think
something
there's
that's
history in the commercial furniture as well with that.
we have some mid-century modern furniture that's like from Christina's grandmother. Like it just
Yeah,
it's not a lot of products can do that. And I think in particular, maybe I should write an article about this, but I'm fascinated with products that I call single taskers. And so what I mean by that is a single tasker is a product that only performs one function. And why I'm fascinated with that is the more tasks a product does, the less aesthetic variation is tolerated. So like the ultimate example of a multitasker is a smartphone, right? And they pretty much all
mm,
they don't have to all look the same, but they pretty much do. Um, and then the ultimate examples of single taskers, chairs, eyewear, watches, your headphones, all these things, they only just do one thing, even that speedboat, right? It just does one thing. Yet, even though all chairs do the same thing, there's almost infinite appetite for new chairs. Every year, there's new chairs at NeoCon. And you'd be like, after thousands of years of making chairs, wouldn't we be good? No, it's the opposite. It's like, people are just like, I need more different chairs. I need more different tables. I need more different watches. Eyewear. Every couple of years they get a new pair of glasses, right? And it's just like, I don't know, I'm fascinated with that connection, I think, to the human psyche of like these things that perform one task. Every watch tells time just as good as every other watch, whether it costs $10 or $10,000. Um, and you don't even need a watch. Yet there's almost infinite variety in that category. So I don't know. There's something there that fascinates me, and it's connection to the human psyche of like we project our own characteristics onto these things, and they become very important.
Yeah, there's like an inherent element of like delight or fun, like where it's there's a way where yeah, the consumer is actively engaging with that product in a different way. I mean, I guess the example that's like happening right now is probably the Stanley Cup that is completely like selling out and going totally bonkers. But it's the same thing, right? Like
Yeah.
water bottles and glasses and drinking vessels. I mean, there's not necessarily like a problem to solve there, but they've clearly like tapped into the right market with the right product and created an interaction that is a lot of fun and that engagement with their customer. Um,
But I think like we're humans are emotional, right? And so there might not be I think there'll always be new functional things to solve for, but it might be very incremental. But there's still like an opportunity to make some kind of an emotional connection. Um, and again, I think goes back to bringing our conversation around what I learned in footwear. Is footwear is so much about emotional connection, and some of that emotional connection is done through the product. Some of that emotional connection is done through the branding, right? Like what is the Jordan without the frozen moment commercial? And what is Nike without just do it? And so there's the branding and the industrial design working hand in hand to tell the same story, um, down to the brand name, right? They didn't name it, you know, really great running shoes incorporated. They named it after a Greek goddess. And so that just tells you so much about the people that started that company, just from their choice of naming their company after the goddess of victory. And so I don't know. I love working with clients around their brand 360 degrees. And I think the product at the end of the day is your ultimate marketing spend, because after they viewed the commercial, got the ad on their phone, ordered it, unboxed it, all that stuff goes away. And what they have left is the product. And so there's this opportunity to create a real connection with somebody through that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Was it Raymond Loewy who said form follows emotion?
That was Hartmut Esslinger
Hartman
from
Esslinger. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's a quote that I love because I feel like so many people are always harping on form follows function, and but I think that form follows emotion. It can really ring true in the context of a lot of what you're saying.
Well,
Um,
and it's our job to help, I think it's part of our job to create kind of artifacts to our culture at the moment. And so, you know, and it's our job to kind of create these uh expressions. Um, and so, while I personally love minimalism, I think there needs to be variety in the world. And I remember reading something that somebody once wrote about the Guggenheim in New York. Architectural critic said the best thing about the Guggenheim is it's the only one on the block. And I think what he meant by that is the Guggenheim is this beautiful minimalist white spiral, but what's next to it is a bunch of like much more traditional older New York City buildings and then Central Park on the other side. And it's the juxtaposition that makes that design stand out, right? So if everything is just a glossy white box with a blinky light on it, that's not special. And especially with the rise of like AI and anybody being able to visualize an idea, how you help a company differentiate is going to be where your value is as a designer, because if you're just doing what everybody else is doing, well, I could go pay 100 people to do that if I even need to hire a person. But if you're doing
Right.
something different from what everyone is doing, well, all of a sudden you actually become valuable to a very small set of people.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I definitely don't want to open that can of worms because I think if we start talking about AI, we'll be here for another 2 or 3 hours. But awesome, Michael. Well, hey, an hour's flown by already, and I know you have a lot to do. I think I only got to two of my 20 or 30 questions that I had here, but
Should we
I
try to
would
do
love to.
one more quick one?
Let me see. I'll have to try to pick out a good one here. I would love to. One I really wanted to ask you was how you kind of define your own principles and influences, maybe as the way it ties to your studio and the business that you're running now. I know you're a big fan of design history and you're a little bit of a design buff. But I was curious how you sort of because we all, as you mentioned, we all hear a lot of advice and we all hear a lot of feedback, and we kind of have these building blocks that we piece together. But I was just curious if you could speak a little bit on how you went through that process or how you identified things that you kind of pulled together or prioritized.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's a great question because I feel like when we're in school, they teach us to like change the world, right? And then you get out of school and you get into a job and you're like, I don't know anything. I don't even know what the world is. How can I change it? And so you immediately learn that to succeed, you're going to need to like put your head down and be a grunt for a while. Um, but then as the years go by, you gain knowledge and experience and influence. And over time, you do get more of the ability to maybe not change the world, but to influence things for the better. And unfortunately, by the time that happens, so many of us are burnt out, disillusioned, um, and our windows have our blinders have come in and we don't see the influence we have. And so that again was a really big part of us starting my studio was like, okay, like I've been doing this now for 25 years. At that time for 20, a little under 20. I have all this knowledge and experience. Can I work with companies that want to do things that are more sustainable, like Cure, where that's really, getting down into like the finishes applied to things and trying to make them as green as possible. Uh, or, with Arc, where, they're trying to electrify this category of sport boats that is like incredibly dirty and inefficient. An average sport boat gets about 1 mile to the gallon of fuel. So very exciting projects. Or with Defender, trying to bring kind of Nike level design to people that have diabetes. And so, I'm really just trying to do things like that that are special across different categories. And sometimes it's simple. Sometimes they're not. Those are three very high-minded clients, but sometimes they're simple things that are just like really exciting and interesting to me. I've worked another company I've worked a lot with is Built Well. They make motorcycle helmets and gear. And, just connecting with them and their passion for riding and their openness. These are all like Harley dudes, and they're like excited that one of their biggest clients are like people that own Vespas. Like, oh, that's really cool. We hadn't even thought of that, and interested in electric bikes and just, people who are open. So I guess to sum it up, like I'm the most interested in just working with people that I connect with who yes, want to do well in business, but also just want to make something that makes a dent in their industry. Maybe it's not going to be world changing, but can it inspire someone else? And I think my biggest principle is, I mentioned that my first job I got at McDonald's was to get a pair of Nike Hirachis. And so for me, it's like, can I create things that some other 15, 16-year-old kid can get and be like, I want to do that. Whatever job this is, I want to do that too. Because that was me. I couldn't afford Jordans, but I could draw. And so um That's my biggest principle is like, am I doing work that would have inspired the 15-year-old version of myself?
Yeah, that's great. That's a very a perfectly like poignant, I think, note to end on. Michael, I really appreciate your time. To kind of wrap up here, if people are interested and want to get in touch or reach out, what's the best way to get in contact with you, whether it's personal or for business?
Yeah, I keep it, as I like to say, I keep the creativity for the clients. So if you want to see more of my work, you can go to michaelditullo.com. If you want to find me on Threads or Instagram, it's DiTullo, but phonetically. So the letter D, the number two, LO. And I'm pretty easy to find if you just, do a quick search.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ray. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.